Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining. My name is Simon Wright, and I am the Director of Programming at Japan House London. And welcome to the second event presented by Japan House London in the series in collaboration with Kyoto Design Lab. With this online panel discussion, we continue to explore new contemporary ways of presenting chirimen, a type of silk crêpe made of flat woven silk from the northernmost region of Kyoto Prefecture, known as Tango. This is exploring Tango Chirimen. Just to give you a brief explanation for all of those of you who are watching, please note that your microphone and webcam will be disabled for the entire duration of the event. Please use the question and answer feature should you have any questions. You can do this throughout the session, and we will leave time at the end for questions to be answered. You can send your questions anonymously or with your name. And the questions will be collated by Japan House moderators. And also, if we do not have time, we are able to try and answer your questions at the end, and our presenters today have very kindly offered to help with that. Please note that the contents of this event will be streamlined live on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn, where a recording will be archived later. So this event is a complement to our current exhibition at Japan House London, which is now open and has been since the 17th of May. That is Making Nuno, Japanese textile innovation from Sudo Reiko, and bookings can be made via our website. So today's event is brought to you from a number of different locations around the world. Japan House, where I am, is based in London. And shortly, we will be passing over to our chair, Julia Kasim, professor at the Kyoto Institute of Technology, who is currently based in Hiedaira in Shiga Prefecture. And Professor Kasim will then introduce presentations from two designers who have contributed to the exhibition Alternative Futures, Contemporary Design Responses to the Tango Chirimen Tradition, held from October 2020 to February 2021 in Japan. Today we are joined by Okamoto Shioka from Okayama in Soja, and also by Kangan Aurora, who is based here in London. The presentations will be followed by a brief discussion with Professor Kasim, after which we'll be able to answer some of the questions from our guests in the question and answer session. We also have with us today Bethan Jones behind the scenes to offer support for any interpretation needs. Thank you very much indeed, Bethan. So I would like to move on, if I may, to introduce today's chair. Hello, Julia. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Simon. It's nice to see you again.
Oh no, thank you once again for this, the second in our series about Tango Chirimen and innovation. For those of you who may not know, Professor Kasim studied fine art in the UK and Japan and is an international authority on inclusive design. As arts columnist of the Japan Times from 1984 to 1999, she curated and designed award-winning exhibitions for audiences with visual impairments, founding a non-profit organization to increase cognitive and physical access to museum collections. In 2000, she initiated the pioneering Challenge Workshops program at the Royal College of Art in London, which brought professional designers together with disabled and older people in an inclusive co-design process. It was the subject of an exhibition at the Victoria and Albert Museum in 2010. In 2014, she became professor at the Kyoto Institute of Technology, charged with setting up Kyoto Design Lab as a center for interdisciplinary design and innovation. Professor Kasim, Julia, we are absolutely delighted to have you with us again. Thank you so much for agreeing to take part and to chair our event today.
So I shall share my screen.
Thank you very much.
So I'm really grateful to the team at Japan House London for this wonderful opportunity to showcase again some of the Chirimen related work by designers who worked on D-Lab projects. And it's also a double honor to do this as part of the Nuno exhibition of the legendary Sudo Reiko. Her example of working innovatively and very proactively with the traditional textile producers of Japan has inspired so many artists and designers for so long, and importantly, the producers themselves. So this is the second event in the Kyoto D-Lab series. The first focused on Chirimen's structure and process, the basic principles underlying it, and how designers have responded to them. If you missed it, it can be seen on Japan House London's YouTube channel, along with all the other online events in relation to the Nuno exhibition, so do please watch them. I'll briefly introduce D-Lab and explain where Chirimen fits in. When D-Lab was established in 2014, I was asked to create a program for the area of design that would achieve the goal of innovation by design. And now KIT is known for its expertise in materials and fiber science, and is one of Japan's 3 historical centers of textile research. So it was totally natural for D-Lab to explore design innovation in relation to the theme of making and materials. This led us straight to Kyotango and the Kyoto Prefectural Center for Northern Industry, known as the Orikin Center, whose major role is research and to technically support the textile industry in Kyotango. Importantly, it must keep the looms going and all the other vital equipment too, because much of it dates back to the 1970s and before that, when Chirimen was in its heyday. The Orikin Center also has a priceless archive of textiles from the Meiji period to the present. And this has been a source of inspiration to many designers and has played a major role in Kangan Aurora's work, as you'll see today. Our collaborative projects in Kyotango led in turn to the creation of the Textile Summer School, which D-Lab then organized yearly. Designers from Japan and around the world spent time in Kyotango observing the production process of Chirimen and interacting with the weavers. Returning to Kyoto, they spent a week at D-Lab. One group explored Chirimen visually as a surface led by Kangan. The other group animated it and other textiles electronically under the guidance firstly of Dr. Sarah Robertson from the RCA, and then the Berlin-based designer Mika Satomi, who will be speaking in the third event of this series on June 10th. Now, the coronavirus forced the cancellation of the Textile Summer School last year, but 2020 also marked the 300th anniversary of Tango Chirimen production. Not to celebrate this anniversary seemed criminal. And D-Lab wanted to express its deep gratitude for the wonderful support given by Kyotango City, the Orikin Center, and the weavers themselves over the years. And the result was the Alternative Futures exhibition, which I co-curated with the weave specialist, Dr. Kaori Ueda, who spoke last week. It featured many of the Textile Summer School alumni. Now, the work was done under trying lockdown conditions in Japan, London, Singapore, Berlin, Paris, Wuhan, Porto, Hong Kong, and the Netherlands. There is a bilingual video on YouTube of the Alternative Futures project. This introduces the individual designers and their works. The link is on the Japan House London website, so do please watch it. For the exhibition, they were asked to put aside any preconceived notions of Chirimen as a material and to respond to it through the lens of contemporary design or craft. So perhaps I should give you an idea of its unique production process. Raw silk yarn is composed of fibrin and sericin. And when boiled, the sericin coating becomes sticky and it must be kept wet as the yarn is twisted. Now, this is done between 3,000 to 4,000 twists per meter for the weft and 1,200 for the warp, and it's key to Chirimen production. The yarn is then dried and the sericin effectively acts as a glue to bind and maintain the twist. The fabric is then woven and after that scoured in alternating vats of boiling alkaline water to remove the sericin. It then shrinks by 30% and takes on Chirimen's characteristic crêpe appearance. Now, some designers like Tiffany Loy from Singapore played with this principle. She combined the high twist yarn with other fibers and then dip dyed or boiled it selectively to create this wonderful triptych. London-based designer Scarlett Yang chose to biohack the surface of silk Chirimen, and her post-exhibition works went on to win the 2020 UFAB Global Creative Award. Her experiments centered on the possibilities of using sericin waste to engineer 3D textures on textile surfaces. And this she did through 3D fabricated stencil printing and by physically channeling the textile surface to be partially degummed. French artist, in contrast, Martine Rey's practice centers on the experimental use of Japanese urushi, or natural lacquer. She laminated remnants of different weaves and weights of silk Chirimen, some of it plain, some embroidered. And this was done using traditional bowls or wang as molds to create this beautiful translucent series of extremely light works. Now, during its long history, Chirimen's fabric quality has changed dramatically, as Weda Kauri explained in the last event. Chirimen was softer and thinner in the past when many layers of kimono were worn together. Now, this type of Chirimen was reproduced at the Orichin Center and sent to Aurore Thibault in Paris. And she used the Katazome technique using natural dyes and French lace as the stencil to create this dramatic work for the exhibition. Now, the focus of today's event is on Chirimen's surface. For the exhibition, the designers were asked to respond to its qualities as a material, either in its finished form or to the very different qualities it displays before it is scoured, as it's shown here. Now, in its unscoured form, before the sericin is removed, it's wider and has a translucent canvas-like quality. Now, the fact that approximately 2 meters of each 13-meter roll is left as a remnant suggested that this could be used perhaps as the basis for high-quality reproductions of artworks. These could then provide an alternative income source for arts organizations looking for ideas for new products, but wishing to retain the original artwork. With my colleague, Inoue Tomohiro, who's in charge of D-Lab's digital factory, we made high-resolution scans of the works of 3 artists from Yamanami Kobo, a studio of artists with disabilities in Shiga Prefecture. These were then inkjet printed with dyes at the Orichin Center, steamed, sprayed with fixative, and then framed or printed on finished Chirimen, with the original drawings enhancing the different qualities of the particular crêpe surface that was used. This one is printed on rough textured Chirimen. But before I introduce our two speakers, I'd like to mention that Chirimen is not only woven in silk. Usi Orimono, who collaborated with our first speaker, Okamoto Shioka, produces polyester Chirimen, as well as hybrid fiber Chirimen made from bamboo rayon and polyester. They've just innovated this Uzura Chirimen, which shrinks not by 30%, but by 70%. And producing a really highly textured surface. Another pandemic-related innovation has been their collaboration with the Sonobe Senko dyeing workshop in Kyoto, where they've used charcoal for the pigment and produced beautiful, highly effective masks. This shows you 2 parts of the process where the charcoal is physically combined on the surface of the fabric and is then baked to fix it. So as a surface and material, Chirimen presents a really complex treasure house of quite different aspects to explore. And tonight we'll hear how Shioka and Kangan have tackled it creatively and technically. So firstly, I'd like to introduce Shioka-san on the right. Shioka is currently assistant professor in textile design at Okayama Prefectural University. She has an MA in textile design from the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts after she studied interior design at Chelsea and at Tama Art University in Tokyo. Her main research topic is textile design in a spatial context. The Sensory Pleasure Project for the Alternative Futures exhibition was a collaboration with Usui Onimono, who's the two projects you've just seen. It won the Red Dot Award Design Concept 2020 and has been showcased at the Red Dot Museum in Singapore. And she'll be talking in detail about the process today. So over to you, Shioka-san.
Hi. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you so much inviting me. I'm honored to be a part of this event. My name is Shioka Okamoto, and I am a textile designer based in Japan, and also assistant professor at Okayama Prefecture University. I'd like to introduce the Sensory Project, a collaboration with the Usui Orimono weaving mill in Kyoto, which specializes in polyester chirimen. Inspired by chirimen's production process, my aim was to use digital technology to transform its surface and give alternative value to the loom waste created from the production system. Chirimen is made of 100% silk, but for this project, I used 100% polyester chirimen, manufactured by Usui Orimono. The polyester yarn is coated with specific substance prior to being woven. This acts like sericin and holds the high twist of the yarn during weaving. The rest of the manufacturing process similar to that of silk chirimen in that it is discarded. The yarn is partially untwisted, resulting in chirimen's characteristic crêpe surface. Approximately 2 meters of loom waste is generated for each roll of fabric. In this picture, I'm comparing the raw unscored fabric called kibata in Japanese and finished polyester chirimen. Unlike fully processed chirimen, kibata is flat, slightly rough, and solid with a different textural quality. I used kibata as material and wondered what would happen if laser cut it before it was scored. I cut simple patterns directly into the surface of kibata and boiled it afterwards, instead of usual scoring process. This shows before and after the experiment. It differs greatly from traditional chirimen fabric in appearance. Through making and analyzing more than 50 samples, I selected these fabric cut patterns and cut 10 millimeter lines vertically in the direction of the warp, placing rows of cut lines alternately makes the fabric unique than if they had been parallel. The more cut lines there are, the softer the effect. These patterns can be combined to create a greater variety of surfaces. I experimented with printed patterns using silk screen printing and disperse dyes. As it requires flat surface, this must be done before it is laser cut. It is then steamed and fixed with hot water. I found that this simple stripe pattern width-wise and showing on top is more effective as it follows the post-shrunk fabric. From here, I'm going to show dimension of the work I have made for the Alternative Futures exhibition. These are the dimensions of the work before treatment, when I printed the patterns first on KYOTO and then laser cut the lines. This is the final dimension after steaming and boiling, with the work having shrunk almost by 1/3, which is characteristic of silk Chirimen too. The printed pattern and cut pattern is incorporated well into the surface. Instead of silk screen printing, inkjet printing with dispersed dye is also possible. These are other samples using the same raw material. Since the technique does not require a large amount of the fabric, it allows small remnants of the fabric to be processed and repurposed for alternative use in products. The traditional textile industry in Japan has declined due to an aging society and the changing in clothing tastes, but there are many specific techniques and histories left. My focus in this project was sustainability and tradition. I hope that sensory pleasure encourages people working in the industry and will inspire designers who have not considered this as a material to be stimulated to find new use for this wonderful fabric. Finally, thank you for Professor Julia Kasim and Mr. Hayato Usui for supporting this project. Thank you for listening.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Shioka-san. I will have questions in the question and answer session about some technical details, but thank you very much indeed for a fantastically interesting and detailed short presentation. I'd like to now pass on to move on to Kangan Aurora, who's taken a very, very different approach. Hi, Kangan. Thanks very much for joining us today. First, I'm going to give you everybody a bio, although you're very well known. Kangan is a textile designer specializing in print and pattern, and as explained previously, she led the experimental print services workshop at successive textile summer schools. Born in India and now based in London, her work centers on bold color, geometry, abstraction, and playful pattern applications. Her signature style is based on geometric shapes and unexpected juxtapositions, which she brings to life through screen printing, weave, digital applications, large-scale installations for clients such as IKEA, Heels, and Floor Story. Now, Kangan trained at Central St. Martin's, where she's currently lecturer in textile and jewelry design. So over to you, Kangan.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you so much for the introduction. And also, I just want to say thank you to Japan House for the invitation to be part of this great event. So I'm going to share my screen in a second. So as Julia already introduced me, I'm Kangan. I work primarily as a printed textile designer. And I'm also a lecturer on the textile design course at Central St. Martin's. So I'm really interested in the power of color to immediately transport you to a place or time. And I often explore this through playful pattern application using print techniques, mostly screen printing. I generally work commercially, so always having a context or an end product in mind, whether it's soft furnishings, rugs, stationery or ceramics, or large-scale installations. So Julia kindly invited me to Kyoto in 2018 and 2019 to sort of lead the print pathway of the Textile Summer School. And we had a wonderful week of lectures and demos and a field trip to Kyotango to visit Chirimen manufacturers and weavers, and also to the Kyoto Prefecture Center for Northern Industry, which is called the Oricon Center, which holds a vast archive of textiles from the Meiji period. So this was really important for all of us to understand the history and the context of Tango Chirimen tradition and the current research that's being undertaken. So back in Kyoto, the theme of my workshop was experimental print surfaces, where we responded to what we had learned from our visit, especially the archive at the Oricon Center. So my focus was on re-exploring and interpreting the visual vocabulary of the archive and also Japanese color that would be applied in a refreshed context. Today I'm going to talk about how I approached the surface and technique, the graphics of the visual vocabulary, and then the color for the work I designed for the Alternative Futures exhibition. So let's start with surface. Being a screen printer, my work is often quite process-led, and a lot of it happens on the print table. So I'm very interested in traditional Japanese print processes. And fortuitously, on the first day of the summer school, we were given a Katazome demo by Akasaka-san. So Katazome is a resist printing method where a rice flour paste is passed through a hand-cut stencil made of washi paper. And you can see from this photo how intricate the designs are. And then dyes are then brushed onto the exposed area. And the stencil process really excited me, and it sort of really resonated with me because I could see how perhaps screen printing evolved from this idea, because we were using stencils as well. So in screen printing, the stencil is etched onto a silk, now polyester mesh, and the print paste is transferred through using a squeegee. So you can see how intricate some of the designs were that Akasaka-san was showing us. At the newly equipped D-Lab textile factory, we used modern digital processes to print our designs onto both polyester and silk. The suggestion is not to replace traditional techniques, of course, but embrace new technologies that offer new possibilities for the manufacturers. Using sublimation, heat press inks, and papers, we were able to test design responses on polyester relatively quickly, but we also had big inkjet digital printers to print directly onto the silk with reactive and pigment dyes. So one of the questions that comes up a lot is the surface of the Chirimen and how it would react to sort of print. How does one print on it with its very high texture? Whilst that's true, Chirimen is known for its high texture surface. It actually comes in a huge range of weights and textures. And prior to the workshop, Julia kindly sent me a range of fabrics to test. I found that using screen printing on the highly textured surfaces left areas of white coming through as the ink did not penetrate the surface, something brushing the dye on addresses well. Here you can see the polyester Chirimen in the center, which was heat pressed, and the white is showing through. However, if you see the same design on the right, it was printed on a fine quality damask Chirimen, which takes the dye very beautifully. So I chose to work with a sort of lighter, finer textured fabric because the focus really of my project was looking at color and pattern and using the Chirimen, the silk Chirimen, exactly for what it was. So coming on to the textile archive at the Oricon Center, what really, this was the room in which all the books were housed. And what really struck me was the simplicity and recurring graphic qualities and aesthetics found in the swatch books. And this became the starting point for creating a refreshed pattern language. I also recognized that these qualities that I was recognizing were sort of, I was also finding them all around me, and they were quite evident in current Japanese visual culture, so in the playgrounds, in the architecture, the road surfaces. And whilst I was obsessing over the checkered pattern I could see everywhere, I visited the kimono exhibition at the V&A last year and learned about the Ichimatsu check. So this is Sanogawa Ichimatsu, who was a popular actor in the 1700s. And he wore a checkered board obi that you can see in the right-hand image, which became an instant sort of fashion craze. And I thought it was really interesting how 300 years later, this sort of, the check is, you know, it's such a universal pattern. It's still as relevant as it was 300 years ago. I also discovered that bold checks from South India that were brought to Japan by the Dutch became very popular in the 17th century. And a lot of Japanese fabrics were derived from South Indian checks. So that was a really nice connection to where I'm from and from back home. So drawing on these various influences, I deconstructed, abstracted, reassembled, and recontextualized these patterns to create deconstructed geometry. Lastly, I just want to quickly touch upon one of the main drivers of the project, which was color. So during my 2 visits to Japan for the workshop, I extensively photographed and recorded the colors I was seeing around me. The worn out factory floors, the telephone boxes, the stationery, the facades of the buildings. And I spent a lot of time in the KIT shop buying a wide array of tape for its beautiful colors as well. I also came across the Dictionary of Color Combinations by artist Sanzo Wada, a reproduction that was derived from his original 6-volume collection of color combinations. He was an artist, costume designer, and art instructor who did a lot of research into color harmony and color names. He traveled extensively, collecting almost 100,000 color samples, and recognized the importance of a standard color system. And so he founded the Japan Standard Color Association in 1927, which later became the Japan Standard Color Association. So some of the components that he champions were adopted from European concepts of similar and contrasting colors. And whilst he suggests these combinations, he also argues that, you know, color combination is subjective and based on one's taste. I also recognize some of the color combinations from the book Down the Post Office, so it was really nice to make those connections in sort of contemporary visual culture. And the first samples he made actually were dyed silk samples, so it seemed fitting to translate these back from his book and print them onto silk. Some of the colors I also recognized from the exhibition at Japan House back in 2019, that presented Japanese color combinations through naturally dyed fabrics and suggested that these changed with the seasons, something that's also touched upon in the Dictionary of Color Combinations. So armed with the patterns from the archives and the colors from the dictionary, I started responding to these elements back in my studio in London through screen printing. And although the final pieces were to be digitally printed in Japan, this part of the process was really important for me to try out all these various new color combinations that weren't strictly following what was suggested in the dictionary, but to try them out in actual scale and off the computer. So the analog process informed the digital outcomes. So these pieces, I would say, are very much a starting point to explore this refreshed pattern language and new color vocabulary that I've been introduced to, that is derived from traditional color and pattern, but has a universality that doesn't bind it in one culture alone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kangan. That's really, it's an absolutely wonderful journey through color. Now, one of the things that you mentioned a little bit about the surface, and one thing that I wondered is that you're known for your very bold designs of quite vibrant and unexpected color contrasts, and also the geometric patterns more than anything. And these, of course, rely on quite sharp lines and very acute angles. Now, Chirimen is a crepe material in whatever form it displays itself. So even if it's very, very fine crepe, it still has the tsubo, the crimp on the top. And so there's an inevitable blurring of the edges, which can be seen as detrimental to precise lines. And I wondered how you dealt with this aspect of Chirimen, particularly in relation to your very specific style.
So the texture of the Chirimen obviously depends on how much the yarn is twisted at the production stage. And, the higher the twist, the more obvious the texture will be. And of course, the challenge is from a print perspective that the dye doesn't penetrate all the way through the fabric and the white gaps are visible, but also the lines start to blur. But also, as Dr. Kauri alluded to in the previous talk, the Chirimen fabric comes in a variety of weights and surfaces available to choose from. So this was one of the reasons I chose the finer Chirimen, but also the silk Chirimen, because it actually, the processes that we used didn't work as well with the polyester, because it was already a thicker, heavier fabric. In fact, the silk Chirimen, I think, was also popular for use on dyeing because of its high absorption of dye traditionally. So in a way, it sort of worked really well with my my designs. But also the other challenge is, I think, the large areas of block color that you can often you'll find that the designs are generally smaller scale and quite detailed, so that to avoid sort of large areas that don't absorb the dye. So one of the ways to come around it was to make sure that there weren't a huge amount of, huge areas of block color. But also we found through testing that digital print on a flatbed prints the designs much like on paper, because the fabric is prepared and coated beforehand, so it stiffens it quite a lot. So it sort of lets the fabric absorb the dye as it would on a paper, but then the subsequent steaming process allows the dye to properly fix on it. So the digital printing process actually worked really, really well for geometric designs, because we eliminated the risk of the bleed.
Yes. Well, the final works where the saturation of the color was really remarkable. You mentioned also the costume design, the color theorist Wada Sanzo, and he in fact actually spent a year in India and Burma in 1914 before he came back to Japan and realized that something had to be done about formally to theorize the color. Now, he died in 1964, and he's been massively influential because he looked at color systematically. And as you said, founded the Japan Standard Color Association. Now, that's a long introduction to a question, but I wanted to ask you, what were the surprises in terms of color combinations in the Japanese palette, and how do they differ from Western and Indian ones?
That's a really good question. I think the dictionary. So he put the dictionary together, or not the dictionary. He put the 6 volumes of color combinations that he produced in the 30s was at a time where there was already a big Western influence in Japan as well. So which of those are traditional and which aren't? There's a sort of blurring there, but also he spent, like you said, he spent a lot of time traveling and studying abroad. So during that time, he also collected, I think, 100,000 samples of color that he brought back to Japan, and then systematically went through them to reduce them to 500, which we see in the book. So I think, having spent a little time in Japan over both the summer schools, some of the colors that were typically Japanese that kept reoccurring, which I could sort of see in the book and all around me. Very specific reds or lacquer black or the Japanese indigo that we all recognize and love so much. I think it's also coming back to the difference, I suppose, in the combinations is also the sensitivity to coming back to Kasane and the suggestion that a lot of the color combinations were influenced by Japanese seasons and that connection to nature, which is evident in all aspects of Japanese culture. And I think lastly, also the sort of light plays a huge role in the depth and intensity of the colors. That's made perhaps a huge difference between the Indian and Japanese colors, the saturation, because of the light and how you see them and how they're perceived. But also I think Sanzo Wada talks a lot about color harmony. From my experience, a lot of conversation in India is often about color contrast. So perhaps this sort of, it's a different approach of harmonizing colors, but or really, really contrasting them.
So thank you, Kangan. We could talk forever about the subject, but I'd like to turn now to Shioka-san. Shioka-san will answer the questions in Japanese, and they will be translated by Bethan. Now, Shioka-san, you were the only designer in the exhibition to work with polyester chirimen, and you explained in a detailed way in your presentation about the difference in the processing. So I won't ask you about that, but I wanted to know, have you ever thought of working with silk chirimen? And if you did, what would be your approach?
はい。まず薄より物で作られているポリエステルチリメンの糸は、よりながら糊をつけています。この糊がセリシンのような役割を果たしています。
With the yarn used by Usui Orimono for the polyester chirimen, it's coated with a glue-like substance as it's twisted, and that acts like sericin.
精錬によってその糊が取り除かれると、シルクのチリメンと同様によりが戻ろうとする働きによって、チリメン特有のテクスチャーが発生します。
And when the glue is removed during the scouring process, the yarn tries to untwist, just like silk chirimen, and it gives it that unique chirimen texture.
私はその糊の特性も作品制作に貢献していたと思います。作品制作ではシンプルに湯で煮沸しましたが、ポリエステルチリメンの糊の方が程よく取り除かれていたと思います。
I think that the qualities of that glue contributed to my work. For this piece, I simply boiled the fabric in hot water, and that seems to have removed just the right amount of glue from the polyester chirimen.
シルクのチリメンでは煮沸後もセリシンの成分が残っていて、縮みますが、硬さは残ったままでした。それはそれで興味深いテクスチャーではありました。
With the silk chirimen, when I boiled it, the sericin remained, and although the fabric did shrink, it was still quite hard, and that in itself was an interesting texture.
Fine. And then the other question I have, which a lot of people have asked me actually about your work, which is that you dyed and then laser cut the surface before scouring it. And I know that, how did you manage to control the burning of the fabric when it was laser cut? And was this a really big problem? How did you control that whole process?
はい。ポリエステルチリメンとシルクのチリメン、どちらに対してもレーザーカットの実験をしましたが、ポリエステルチリメンの方がレーザーカットに適していると思います。
So I tried laser cutting both polyester and silk chirimen fabrics, and it turns out that polyester was actually more suited to laser cutting.
シルクの場合では焦げるだけでなく、糸のほころびも多数発生しました。さらに細かなカットや斜めにカットした場合、破れてしまうこともありました。
With the silk, not only did it burn, the yarns broke in several places, and also when I made very fine cuts or diagonal cuts, the fabric actually tore.
一方で、ポリエステルの場合は、あたかもプラスチックのように、レーザーがエッジを少し溶かしているようで、糸のほころびが少なく、エッジがきれいに仕上がりました。
With the polyester, though, I guess because it's plastic, the laser melted the cut edge slightly, and there was less breakage of yarn, and the resulting edge was neater.
実際、カットラインのエッジに焦げは発生していますが、最終的にデコボコしたデザインに視覚的に溶け込んでいきます。さらに、煮沸が洗浄を兼ねて、焦げの色もかなり薄くなります。
There is some burning of the cut edges, but ultimately that blends into the crimped design of the Chirimen, so you can't see it. And also the boiling process washes the fabric, so any burnt color is actually very faint by the end.
It's very interesting. I mean, the one would inevitably think that the polyester would be less robust than the silk and would melt, but obviously that's not the case. My last question really to you is, as a Japanese textile designer, many of the designers in the exhibition were not from Japan. But you were from Japan, and I think the question really is, what are the challenges of reconceptualizing traditional fabric like Chirimen, which comes with a huge cultural baggage around it? How did you sort of liberate yourself from that and approach the work?
はい。私は、伝統を変化していくものだと思っています。このレーザーカットの方法は、サマースクール参加時に思いついた方法で、個人的には全く抵抗なくトライしました。木端の存在をその時初めて知ったんですが、私にはポテンシャルの高い材料に見えました。
Well, I believe that tradition is something that changes. This method of laser cutting is something I came up with at the summer school, and I had no resistance to trying it out. It was the first time that I'd come across the pre-scouring raw kibata fabric, and it seemed to me to have a lot of potential.
後から臼井様に話を聞きましたが、出来上がっている生地を切るという考えは、織り手としては考えもしないことだったと聞きました。私はテキスタイルに従事していますが、織り手ではなくて、学生の頃から染めやプリントなどサーフェスデザインに取り組んでいることも、加工に抵抗がなかった理由かもしれません。既存の生地に対して何かアクションや加工をして変化が効果として現れる瞬間は成功体験で、とてもワクワクするものです。
When I spoke to Mr. Usui later, he said that as a weaver, he would never have come up with an idea that involved cutting the finished fabric. And although I do work with textiles, I'm not a weaver. I've been involved in dyeing and printing and surface design since I was a student. And maybe that's the reason why I had no resistance or objection to treating the fabric in this way. When I apply an action or a process to an existing fabric, the moment I see the resulting change feels like success, and it's really exciting.
日本の現場では製造工程や商品としての仕上がりのために課されている条件が多くて、なかなか大きく変化していくことが難しいと思います。でも現状に疑問を投げかけ、既成概念にとらわれず、小規模でもチャレンジングな取り組みをしていくことが大切だと思います。
In Japan, there are many conditions imposed on the manufacturing process and the finished product, and it is hard to change things. But I think it's important to question the status quo and not to be bound by preconceptions and to try new things, even on a small scale.
And Okuma-san, there is a question actually from one of the audience, Sophie. She's asked, what's the difference in textural experience on the skin between the original surface, presumably of the Chirimen, and the manipulated surface? Is the manipulated surface fluffier than the original?
テクスチャーの違いはかなりあります。で、私が作ったデザインの方が少しゴワゴワしています。
There is quite a big difference in the texture of the two fabrics. My design is actually a bit rougher.
そして付け加えるとすると細かく切れ目を入れてるので少し伸びる。ちりめんは縮むんですけど、それとカットパターンが組み合わさって伸びる感じがあります。
And also because of all the cuts that I've inserted into the fabric, it stretches.
So, Shiyoko-san, this is a question from me, really. As you produce this really wonderful cloth, what applications do you see for it in terms of product? Because I know that you're very concerned about this wastage, the loom waste.
まず破棄される部分を利用してプロダクトっていうか今回のテキスタイルデザインを作ったので割と小さめのものでも対応できると思っています。破棄されるものを使うので大きな、カーテンとかそういった大きな規模のものではないと想定しています。
Well, firstly, because these are the remnants, the offcuts that would otherwise be thrown away. They're quite small, so it has to be that the use cases also need to be for smaller products. It couldn't be something like a curtain, for example.
今、臼井さんと少し話をしたりしている内容としては、小さなポーチ手に持つものは可能性としてあるでしょうし、私が少し思っているのは壁にウォールパネル、パブリックパネルみたいにしてあしらうことで何か音響効果軽減させたりとかそういった、少し機能も伴ったものにできないかなと思っています。
I've been talking to Mr. Usui about possible applications, and we've talked about small things like purses, handbags, but also an idea of mine is that we might be able to use it as a kind of fabric wall panel, and that might have some kind of acoustic effect. So there could be some functional role that it could play as well.
We've got lots of questions, actually. This one is really, for Kangan, from Connie Flynn. She said, thank you to all the speakers. It's so interesting to hear about the process from the inspiring visit to Japan and then how it influenced the work with regards to color, material, and textures. So if you could answer, how has it, in general, influenced your work with regards to materials, color, and textures?
Well, I think, travel generally inspires lots of different directions, lots of new ideas. The visit to Japan, particularly for the summer school, where we were given such an in-depth introduction to the traditional Chirimen tradition, which we wouldn't have otherwise, I think, through an exhibition. I think sort of being there immersed in Kyotango, sort of speaking to the weavers and also talking about current context, because I think at the end of the day you have to bring it back to current context as well, and how it's possible to take the tradition forward. So like Shiyoko-san said, you tradition is there to evolve and to take forward. So I think in terms of how it's inspired, it sort of inspired it quite all-encompassingly, because I mean, especially color and pattern, which of course I've applied to the Chirimen, but it's also something that I'm developing across weave and across sort of different products into rugs. But that sort of visual language that was seen in the books in Kyotango a few years ago has triggered lots of different ideas.
Yes.
So yeah.
Thank you, Kangan. And I think this will have to be the last question. It's for Shiyoko-san. This is from Alex Rubin. He's hello, thank you for a wonderful, generous talk and Japan House exhibition. Has Shioka applied the process to a spatial and or sculptural context, please?
そうですね、現在のところは臼井さんとコラボレーションして進めているので、捨てられるものを活用してっていうことで動いてきたんですけど、少しオリキンセンターからいただいたシルクの木型の方も手元にあったりして、少し他の実験もできるかなって思ってます。で、そうなってくるとアートピースだったり、より手を入れた、手の込んだ仕事もできると思うので、スカルプチャー、私の制作としてはスカルプチャーという感じではないんですけど、何かアートピースは作れるかなと思っています。
Well, the work that I've done so far has been in collaboration with Usui-san, and the idea behind it has been how to make use of this waste and what we can do with that. But I do have some silk kibata that has been given to me by the Orikin Center, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to use that for some other experiments. So although my work isn't necessarily sculptural, I'm hoping that using those pieces of kibata, silk kibata that I've received, I'll be able to make something more complex, maybe some art pieces.
And sorry, this will actually be the last question. Again, it's another one from an anonymous attendee for Shioka-san. Fantastic results. In your knowledge, are there any traditional Chirimen examples where historically artisans have used cuts of any type, of any kind?
切るということですよね。
そうです。
私はあまり見たことがなかったのかなと思って今回チャレンジできたことはすごい光栄に思っています。で、さっきも質問の回答でもちょっと話したんですけど、臼井さんが結構直接出来上がったものを切るっていう感覚があまりこれまで作り手としてはないっていうふうなことは聞いていました。
I hadn't really come across any examples of cutting the fabric, which is why it was an honor that I got to try it. And as I mentioned earlier, Usui-san told me that he, as a weaver, really had no concept of cutting the fabric.
でも最近は現代的なテクニックとしてレーザーカットとか 3D プリントとか結構世界中でデザイナーが使ってきていたのでそういう意味ではファッションではレーザーカット使われた例は多いんじゃないかなと思います。
But recently, designers around the world are using these contemporary techniques, including laser cutting and 3D printing. And I know there are some examples in fashion now of laser cutting being used.
Thank you very much, Shioka-san. I'm going to pass you over to Simon, who I believe you may have a question or it's to end the event.
well, okay. Seeing as, yes, you've tempted me with a question, actually. If we do, very quickly, it's maybe to everybody, actually. In turn, and it's coming up from last week as well. I'm very interested, Julia, in this. What is the successful sweet spot between tradition and innovation, between processes and creativity, between functionality, design and art, that these skills can be used successfully and have some form of sustainability? And I'd like to maybe hear from any of you from your experiences there.
I think there's a misconception about tradition. Traditions are always ongoing. In other words, that traditions are things that evolve. You know, that what was being done 300 years ago is not the same. You know, tools change, equipment changes, faster ways of doing things evolve. And so I think that historians often see things as fixed, but designers don't. Designers just are there like magpies. You know, they seize on things which will, here's something I can use and exploit. So I think that where it's exploited sensitively and with integrity, then you get really, really new, innovative stuff, which in turn may become a tradition in its own right. Who knows?
Wonderful. I think. Well, Kangan, did you want to say something?
No, I totally agree. I totally agree with what Julia's saying. I think that's a really nice place to. Yeah, I just.
Thank you. I agree as well, Julia. That's exactly what we try to do at Japan House, to use the idea of tradition being present and future. We never use the word traditional, or we try not to, because traditional automatically fixes people's mind back to a past, and that's a false perception of what tradition is, which forces you to use the present tense whenever you use it, really. Thank you so much. Thank you. It is indeed time. Thank you so much, Julia, for having coordinated all of this, and to Kangan in London, just down the road from me at the moment, but also to Shioka in Japan. Thank you so much for joining us as well. That's 1, 2, 3, 4 different locations we've managed to put together this time round. Marvelous. Thank you very much. Thank you also to our interpreter, Bethan Jones. Thank you very much for helping with us there. Thank you also to the audience. If your question hasn't been answered, then the participants today have very kindly offered to be able to answer this for you. Please do submit your questions to events@japanhouselondon.uk. Following the event, you'll be sent a attendees feedback questionnaire by Japan House London. Please do fill it in. It will help us continue to do these kinds of events for the future. All 3 events in this series with Kyoto Design Lab are being recorded and can be viewed on Japan House London YouTube, Facebook, or LinkedIn pages. The second one we just had now is the last that Julia will be taking part in as chair, and we have another one shortly, which I'll introduce you to in a bit. Thank you so much. Please do stay on the line while I tell you a little bit about what we've got coming up. We have our upcoming exhibition within Japan House. We're very excited. We are open to the public, so please do book online. It is Making Nuno, Japanese textile innovation from Sudo-reiko, which began on the 17th of May and runs until the 11th of July. We also have a gallery tour series to accompany that. They start tomorrow, Thursday, the 27th of May, where we'll have a guided tour of the exhibits on the ground floor and the lower ground floor. You can book for that as well. Our next online event, I believe, yes, indeed, Kibiso Textile Sustainability in Yamagata. It's a workshop visit and conversation with the craftspeople in Tsuruoka in Yamagata using Kibiso with Sudo-reiko. That's on Friday, the 4th of June. And we have, as I mentioned, the 3rd in our series with Kyoto Design Lab, exploring Tango Chirimen. This time it's scenario. This will be with Anne Toomey from the Royal College of Art. She's the head of program and a reader in smart textiles. And she will be chairing that event. And we're very grateful to her as well. And to continue that deep dive into Tango Chirimen. Thank you very much, everybody. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with you. Thank you so much for your very generous expose of the work that you've been doing. It's of great interest. And if you're watching online and you are able to also visit Japan House, please do. And I hope one day we will also be able to visit Tango Chirimen makers in Tango as well at the same time. So thank you so much, and keep safe, everybody, and speak to you again soon. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.